My name is Sam James. I'm the coal host, and I'm joined by my canary in a coal mine.
I'm the coal hoist, Gabe Christie.
Mine was better. And this very special episode, we are joined by Gabe Christie interviewing
Mitch Troutman, the author of the Bootleg Coal Rebellion. You'd like to introduce yourself, Mitch? Yeah, sorry.
I will, but I am not up to speed with your pun game. I'm sorry, But yeah, my name is Mitch Troutman. I wrote this book. I dug into this history, and happy to share it with you guys.
Awesome. Well, sent you over a couple questions. So I think we'll start with the simplest one of what is bootleg coal, which is kind of a big question, but
yeah. No, it's cool. So it's funny, there's like bootleg liquor from Prohibition, right? And during that time, like anything that was happening illegal, they just called it bootleg, So you didn't pay tax on your milk. That was bootleg milk, So when I'm going through all the newspapers from back then, there's a lot of references to bootleg things. So bootleg coal, basically stolen coal, but people would have disputed that, said it wasn't stolen. They worked for it. So when the companies started closing down a lot of mines, a lot of the like older, less mechanized mines in the late 20s, early 30s, a lot of these towns in the coal region, like 2-3 hours from Philly, think Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, except we're talking lower down like Pottsville and Centralia, the burning town. That's the one people know. Yeah, so when these companies closed down and these towns are based like almost entirely around this company, people had nothing left to do, and they tried all sorts of things, this and that. They tried to get creative and all that too, but at the end of the day, they just went out and dug their own coal mines on company grounds as like partnerships, basically between a few families, like 3 to 5 people. Most of them certified miners who had been laid off, but over time, there were more people getting involved who hadn't mined, who were just also unemployed and desperate enough to go in a bootleg coal mine, which is maybe as scary as it sounds,
Yeah.
And it got massive. So they had done it before during like strikes and things like that as a way to hold out against the company. But when things really shut down, and they shut like all over, especially the lower coal region shut down, people started doing it in such huge numbers that it really developed into its own industry. At some point, it's estimated. I mean, there's a lot of estimates. I think the most accurate one, though, says 10% of all anthracite coal being produced at the time was bootleg coal, and the largest of the companies was producing 10% of all the coal too. So they were rivals, and the difference. There's like a bunch of geology stuff that like kind of matters to the story, even though it feels a little nerdy. But but the anthracite coal, hard coal, it has more carbon in it, and it's used for home heating, like more than other things. And then bituminous coal, the kind in West Virginia and all that,
Mm-hmm.
that's used by industry. If you burn it in your house, it would have way too much sulfur and stuff. It'd choke you out. And you have a lot more ash and stuff left over. Anyway, so at the time, like everybody on the East Coast was burning anthracite coal for heat. In Philly, you had, the coal and ice place, every couple of blocks, there'd be a coal and ice place where everybody got those two commodities,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how the bootleggers made their market, taking it to Philly, selling it and all that. But
Nice.
I mean, it's a whole book. There's a lot of detail.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out like how do we condense this entire book down to an hour and a half-ish. But how did you get interested in the topic?
Well, I'm from Northumberland County, and this takes place like especially in Northumberland and Schuylkill counties, So I grew up around there, and I didn't know any of this because a lot of people say to me, like, even from the area, like, oh, wow, I'm sorry, I just didn't know about this stuff. It's crazy, But nobody did because nobody wrote about it, right? Mm-hmm. So growing up, there were like some coal miners still around, and they were called the bootleg miners, but they had some family mines. They were legal. most of the time, you know. But I wasn't like too close to them. I wasn't in a family that was doing that, and so yeah, I just knew it was a thing. And I mean, there's like huge piles of old waste coal around. So very very undeniable, you know, what built the region, even if there hasn't been a mine running, like a big mine running, in who knows how long.
Yeah.
But so that was in the back of my mind, and then at some point, how much of a story to tell? I used to be doing some like labor and community organizing, and I got super burnt out, and I just like went back to the coal region and like partied, right? And everybody parties there by going out into the strip-ins, they call it, the abandoned strip mines. And everybody just treats it like it's theirs to do with whatever. You know, there's like some lakes that are flooded strip mines. You know, people put like a little boat on there. There's a squatted RV park for a while, like where people would camp in the summer, and the pizza place in town would even deliver there. Yeah,
that's awesome.
So I was going out there all the time, you know, and I was writing a blog just for something to do, kind of telling stories about the area back to people, you know, and it was like really jarring for people to hear, because there's so much weird stuff out there that's like really not normal, except for people there. It is so normal that you wouldn't even think about it, you know? And so the strip-ins is one of those things. And I started digging into it. Like, there's got to be something like historically, like why is this like a culture here when it's not anywhere else I've been, you know? I mean, you know, in Philly, maybe it's not this way as much anymore, but when there used to be more like old factories around and stuff, people, you know, you go in them, check them out, hang out there or whatever. But it, not with the attitude of like, oh, if I felt like taking all the gypsum out of this old gypsum factory, that's what I'd do, you know?
Yeah. So the one thing that kind of stuck out to me, because we had last week, we had just recorded the general textile strike in Hazleton.
Okay, in 34 or whatever, 33.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
34. And the one thing that I kept running into with that, and it was kind of jarring doing the research for that and then going to your book, because they basically kept going out and would do like a flying picket, show up at a factory, picket, and then immediately state police would come and clear them out. And it was really interesting going through your book and all of the stories of the state police basically just being hands off in what anywhere else would have been like calling in the National Guard and clearing them out with armored trains and anything else to destroy this. If you can elaborate a little bit on basically how they managed to get away with all of an operation of this scale.
Yeah. I mean, so I can give you a lot of reasons, but at the end of the day, it's also like baffling, you know? Hazleton's like 20 miles away, 15 miles away from some of these places, you know? Now it is sort of a different world even today over there. You have like different business entities. The ownership of the coal mines was different back in the day and all that, you know? But couple things, probably a lot of things. Hazleton had a lot more employment through the Depression than the lower region did, right? And so when they were picketing companies, those were like active companies who are like losing money today when they're being picketed, right? The companies who had closed down their stuff, now they felt like they were being competed with by the bootleggers, right? And that they thought hurt them, but there wasn't like a single company who was directly losing money, right? So there's that. There's that. Also, the public, like the national public, really hated the coal companies. You know, like I said, you know, the East Coast is getting their heat from them, and every time there's a strike, this is like the coal companies, the corporations were sort of like the last wave of rich people before they started doing PR. You know, so when there were strikes, the coal corporations would just be like, screw them, you know, and the miners union would be, you know, okay, well, we'll meet you halfway. Let's have a meeting. And they'd be like, no. And all the people in Philly and New York sitting there cold, you know, were like, what the hell? Right. And so there was a widespread dislike of the coal companies.
Yeah.
And you have the New Deal government coming in, right? Shifting alliances and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also have like what made it possible on like just a community scale was just the sheer amount of people doing it, and that it was some of the only money coming in. And then that kind of builds up to the point where when politicians wanted to run for like state senate or whatever, they would have to go to the Bootleg Coal Union meeting, you know?
Gotcha.
And so they had the cover of, the judges and things like that on the county level. Because even the merchants, even the town's rich people or whatever, they know where their money's coming from,
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's still baffling, I mean, ultimately the reason given was by Governor Pinchot, right, who was famous for being the conservationist, kind of like establisher of the national park system under Teddy Roosevelt. He has like a second life as the Pennsylvania governor, second political life. And he just says to the coal companies, basically, I don't like you.
I mean, it's a fair thing.
And he says the same thing the bootleg miners were saying, which is, this is your problem. If you reopen the mines, that goes away overnight. Right? Like people want safe conditions. They want like people weren't making, there was a lot of money coming through bootleg coal, but nobody was like making a lot on their own. Right? People would have been happy to go back to like their union job at the mine,
Yeah.
So the people said reopen the mines. The town middle classes said reopen the mines, and so the governor was like, "You can fix this on your own. I'm not touching it." And then the governor after him, Pinchot was a Republican. It was weird. And then the governor after him was like a straight New Dealer who was like, "Okay, I'll keep going with that. Yeah, we're just gonna pretend this isn't happening." But
so he was a politician. Okay.
Yeah, he was a politician. I think that one, Governor Earl, I think he was quoted as saying something straight up like, "Why should I help them? They didn't vote for me." Which is what every politician thinks and does, like love him or hate him, right? But he was a little too raw about that. But then the anti-New Dealer governor, the third in a row, even he kept the truce up, because by that point it would be like a big policy shift to actually start dealing with it, But the truce basically always was, as long as you don't start shooting people. And there were some guns going off there towards the end of the Depression. So then the state police come in, and also World War II, the draft, the economy picks up. Old factories are being retrofitted to make weapons and all this, kind of caps off the bootlegging thing. It comes back in the 50s, but I had to stop somewhere. It was never as big as it was here. But yeah, why didn't this, they were afraid of civil war. That was another quote the politicians would say, is like, these people are basically backed into a corner. If we go after them, like some of them aren't afraid to die, and they don't have like an alternative. So yeah, there was definitely a fear of that, because even with the West Virginia mine wars, you're still not talking. It's a bunch of people, it's a few thousand people, but it's not quite the scale of the bootleg miners, Hell, in the Civil War, parts of Schuylkill County fought the Union Army. They weren't.
Wow.
They weren't Confederates. They just were Irish, and we're like, we just showed up. What the hell? We're not going to fight that war. So anyway, there's a history there.
So that, I guess, that also kind of ties into my next question, and it might be the same answer, that it especially, well, I guess, if you can explain a little bit on the kind of more direct action against strip mining operations that started to show up later.
Yeah, there's a lot of things converging at once, and one of them is this anti-strip mine sentiment, not sediment. Done with geology. Got a pun in. All right.
Hey, you got to. Welcome to the club.
Yeah, a lot of things
Gabe, you're out.
converging. They largely hate strip mines. It's not an environmental thing, though. You don't like to see it, but they didn't really care that much about that. It's mostly that it put people out of work, right? With these big machines, you could have 5 or 6 people do the work of 100 underground miners. Though they didn't hold it against people who took those jobs; those were like union jobs as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they hated it for that reason, especially when the companies are closing down mines and opening strip mines. And also, sometimes, the company would say, oh, we own this town, so get out. We're strip mining it next week, right? And so there were some, serious standoffs there, too. Mm-hmm. And about a dozen different times, the bootleg miners surrounded and destroyed the strip mine shovels, usually with dynamite. But once or twice, I think they just smashed them real good. These were epic. A lot of them, there'd be thousands of people who came out to do it. Some of them were days-long standoffs where there's just people camped in front of the shovel so that it can't get into the coal areas. And the other thing is the strip mines could be used to destroy the bootleg mines, right? So drop that shovel in there and crush all that hard work, Yeah. And so, people were against it, and they could be quite funny about it, There's a quote that I put in the book that I found in a newspaper where, they're surrounding this shovel in Shamokin, and they asked the guy running it, hey, do you got insurance on this thing? Yeah. All right, get the hell out. We're blowing it up, And it's what's amazing is that the companies often back down after that. Mm-hmm. Because it's well, okay, if they destroyed that, we got way more expensive things than that we don't want destroyed,
Yeah. And that's another thing that, because you had also mentioned that the Communist Party was actively organizing in the region, or at least, I guess not really organizing, but trying to organize after the miners had all organized themselves already. But it was also just kind of shocking that there wasn't a huge amount of red baiting, especially once the shovels started getting blown up. Because there again, every story in Philly is you say the word wages and then you get slandered as a communist and you can't find work for another 5 years. And it was really surprising to not see that happening on a wider scale.
Yeah, no, it's weird. It's just straight up weird that it wasn't happening. I mean, it would be mentioned or something in a national paper. The local papers were for the bootleggers.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have done that. Also, everybody knew who was doing these things. People went to their graves not saying who actually lit the dynamite on these things.
Gotcha.
But
respect.
Yeah. But people knew, in general, who did it, right? Mm-hmm. If not the person, it was that time all of us went out and blew it up, together.
Yeah.
So there was a Communist Party group. There were maybe 50 people max in the lower coal region. And some of them were respected, they were elected as leaders in the bootleggers unions. A lot of people said, oh yeah, they have good ideas just when they get on that atheism thing or trying to get our bootleg union to say the U.S. should recognize the USSR International Court or whatever, Yeah. People would be like, that was kind of weird, but they have some good ideas too. Pretty sure none of those guys ever were the ones to blow anything up, Now, the communists weren't trying to organize the bootleggers because the way they saw it, the way the local party saw it, was these guys have already found their solution, Mm-hmm. And they were active doing unemployed organizing in the same towns in the same era, and literally the same people too. But it's just like phenomena, because there's other movements going on. There's this equalization movement thing going on inside the union too. And I think a lot of them were probably the same people doing all of it. It's just, it doesn't look good if you show up to a legit thing and say, I'm a bootlegger, or show up to a union thing and say, I'm unemployed, like with the communists, because it was openly communist,
Yeah.
But so there were a bunch of communist bootleggers, and they were just miners who lost their jobs like everybody else, So, yeah, but why wasn't it red baited? I don't know. I mean, they did in the 50s come around and go after a bunch of them. Actually, I did a book release event in Minersville in Schuylkill County, and that was like the hub for the communists, right? And I was in this volunteer fire company doing this event, and I was telling them that, you guys were like the hub for communists. And they're like, communists in our town, huh? Wow. And this one woman goes, I remember back in 1950 when I applied for a federal job, the FBI came around and asked everybody if I was a communist. And then a few other old people were like, oh, yeah, the FBI was really around here a lot in the 50s,
They had nothing better to do. Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the communist bootleggers went before House of American, whatever it was called, HUAC, right? The McCarthy thing. And they he immigrated here when he was 4 or something, and they deported him back to that country then.
Jeez.
Yeah. So I don't know. The red baiting did come around, and it also played into a divide in the bootleg miners later on, towards the end of the Depression, where I don't know, some of them just got an anti-communist fever basically, and split the bootleg union in Minersville actually, and it was the communist faction wasn't all the communists. It was actually over a different issue, and it just came down that the communists were on one side and this other guy, Brennan, was on the other, where the communists were still with the line that most of the bootleggers were, which is reopen the coal mines, right? That's our demand. And this newer faction was saying, you know what? Bootlegging's pretty good. Let's figure out how to legalize this, and just keep working for ourselves.
On the opposite end of the spectrum, did you find any, or I guess, how did the Pennsylvania Dutch end up on kind of the fascist or more right-wing side and all of that? Because that struck me as really weird.
Real quick, Mitch, Gabe threw me over the show notes, and I saw that sentence, and I was like, what the fuck are we going to talk about? You have my attention, sir.
Yeah. So you sent me these questions a few hours ago, and I was talking to a buddy of mine who's a historian of the same area, right? But would know more of this. He sent me something about Klan chapters in different counties and stuff. I need to dig more into it. But so 1920s KKK, huge thing across the country, right? And it's really anti whoever the hell is around you. It's not. It really though, really.
Yeah.
So there's Pennsylvania Dutch bootleg miners. Most of the miners in general are, second generation immigrant or whatever at this time. Italy, Eastern Europe. The Irish have been here for a little longer. And the Pennsylvania Dutch have been there a lot longer than all of them, and actually kind of spoke less English than a lot of the second generation immigrants. And so there was already a divide in the minds where the Dutch, just talked in Dutch to each other. So there were a bunch of Klan chapters that formed right on the other side of the mountain from coal towns, who were fuck immigrants and their papism or whatever, the Pope. And occasionally had marches. They'd go to the town and march through it and be like, you suck.
Yeah, Klan stuff.
And yeah, Klan stuff. And it was weird because the Klan was like super official for like a couple years. You know, there's tombstones that have like KKK member on it, you know, like obituaries and shit. People would just be like, oh, he was in the Kiwanis and the Klan, you know?
And the Boy Scouts.
Normal things.
Boy Scout. Yeah. And but then like in a few years after that, the fad is gone, you know, and I think it has that's a whole other subject why that happened, but you know, it kind of faded away. But there's a great story in the book about the communists wanting to go work. No, actually, yeah, the communists want to go organize the unemployed in this one particular coal town that's mostly PA Dutch, and they're kind of scared because they're like, well, they marched in our town, you know, and they're scary. But they went down there, and the miners were also you know, unemployed. Their stuff was also shut down, and like the like lead communist gives an excellent speech, and they're all like, oh great, we got to work with you, you know, and like the pastor was all about it. Anyway, weird story. But I was asking about Nazis specifically.
That's a good start.
To my friend who's the historian of the area too, and doesn't seem like there was much. I don't know why. You know, like in New Jersey, like a lot of German descendant people were pretty pro-Nazi. What do they call it? The American Party or something?
There's the German American Bund, and then there was the America First Party, I think, if I remember correctly. But
yeah, so there's like no trace of that I can find, except for that thing in Baltimore, right? So the bootleg truckers, they are people. Trucking's kind of new, and also the coal companies are owned by the rail companies, so they refuse to put coal in trucks, you know, because they're trying to funnel the profits into the rail. And so trucking's like wide open for the bootleggers.
Oh yeah,
people start saving up money, buying trucks. Driving it to Philly, driving it to Baltimore. And I got to tell this story because this is good. Like they start by, they like don't know anybody. So they just drive to a neighborhood and start knocking on doors. Like, y'all want some coal for $2 cheaper, you know? Like they build up networks that way. And so, you know, each coal trucker would have their place that they went. But then as soon as people in the city started seeing this, they started doing the same thing. And they had to do it backwards, where there were people in Philly and Baltimore who would buy a truck, or maybe they already had a truck for some other business and would switch it into this. And they would drive out to the coal region and just drive around looking for bootleggers, you know? So there's city-based, like there's a Baltimore's Bootleggers Union, there's Philly Bootlegger Truckers Union, you know, and in Baltimore, at least, a bunch of the drivers are black, and I don't know how many, and I would love to find more of that history, but I really couldn't find too much more. But definitely some of them are white, because like around 39 or so, they like tried to propose that the Bootleggers Union, like, I don't know, endorse Nazis or something like that. And the people in Northumberland and Schuylkill County, they were pretty blunt. They were just like, get this shit out of here. Fuck you. Yeah. We never want to hear that again. You know, like, and it was like just like a little blip, you know, it wasn't even really anything that happened much, but it just is damn bizarre.
I mean, I'm just trying to imagine the union meeting where like the communist comes up and says, we need to recognize the USSR as like the home for all workers. And then the next guy comes up and says, we need to recognize Nazi Germany as the true home of the Aryan race.
Yeah. And then the guy in a white hood comes up and he says, I hate all of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fantastic visual, but they wouldn't have been in the same meeting for sure.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to imagine is, I was looking for proof. Like, I know there's black truckers. I'm pretty damn sure they were in the truckers union, because they were trying to get everybody in it. That was the point.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to imagine, okay, there's a bootleg trucker meeting in Baltimore that's like, hey, black truckers don't come to this one or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like they're like, okay, so like the bootleg story is so weird. It's because every time I scratched at something, more weird stuff popped out, right? And so this, whatever this is that was going on in Baltimore at the time, I want somebody else to scratch at that because I guarantee it's not a straightforward story.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is sequel bait right here.
It was also kind of surprising that there weren't it didn't seem like there were really any ethnic tensions between all of the like 50 different immigrant communities that were all in the mines together. And this, I mean, that was in Hazleton as well, that it kept being described as like 20 different churches on one block.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, you'd have the Orthodox churches, like, I don't know, Mount Carmel has a neighborhood that's just called Church Row, Yeah, no, there's tons of them. They're segregated, though I don't know if that's the right term because I think there was community in that, But there's still like most of these towns today still have different neighborhoods. Like there's a couple of towns. Shamokin has it, a neighborhood they call the Polish Poconos because it's up on the hill outside of town, But the thing is, 1902 strike, a few decades before this time period, the big lesson they learned from trying to form a union for decades and just getting destroyed. The big lesson they learned is you can't. Well, the quote is, "It's not Polish coal, it's not Irish coal, it's not Lithuanian coal, it's coal, and you mine it." Right. Mm-hmm. And so that was like the message of the 1902 strike. That was like the big one that finally unified everybody and established the UMW in the anthracite fields. So people knew that, people internalized that, Also, there's, World War One. And then World War One has a lot of like anti-German shit too, so the Germans are being a little less German as well.
If that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, people were still divided up into neighborhoods and went to separate churches and things like that for sure.
Yeah.
But I think there was, probably had the Polish bars and the Irish bars and all that as well. But it really just didn't seem to come up that much. I mean, people still referred to each other as, Paul the Lithuanian. There was that. I don't know. Wasn't really there. But so I have a question for you, Gabe.
That's not how this works, Mitch.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. My podcast now. My question for you is: I've had like people ask me this, and I have trouble answering it. Like in reading the book, did you find any of it like relevant for today?
Yeah, I think and that's something that I've found kind of writ large across all of the labor history that we've been studying, that it's I guess the biggest thing is that all of the issues and crap that we face today not only has its roots back in 100 years of political economy, but is that, like, I like to explain it as the playbook has already been written. You just have to go back and read it, that people already faced all of these issues and they came up with their own solutions, which generally worked pretty well, or they didn't work at all. And I think there's a lot to be learned by just going back and looking at all of the older labor actions and seeing like, oh, they faced this exact same issue. This was their solution. It worked for them then. We might as well try that now. Obviously, with bootlegging, it's a little bit less direct because we're not as likely to go out and start digging holes. But I think there's just the kind of attitude of like not waiting on anyone else to come up with the solution, but just getting together with everyone around you and being like, we need to survive, so we just need to rely on each other and we'll figure it out.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
He was just testing you to see if you actually read the book.
Yeah, I noticed you didn't reference anything specific. No,
on page 126.